Why did the Nazis send Jews to the concentration camps and not just kill them on the spot? Mostly they worked them to the brink of death first. Also, they wanted to somewhat hide the extent to which they were killing millions of people. 2 reasons. First, maintaining cooperation. They gradually moved the Jews out of their homes to concentration camps and the Jews complied. If they just started shooting them, the Jews would flee or fight back. Second, because it was too hard on the people doing the killing. The Germans had mobile death squads at the start of the war. When they seized land in Eastern Europe, they would have villages line up beside the train tracks and then shoot them all with machine guns from the trains. Massacring civilians like that in cold blood caused severe trauma to the German troops involved. So they needed to find a way of doing it that had less impact on the soldiers. It was more efficient. Initially they tried all kinds of methods. They had buses rigged to pipe the exhaust fumes back inside. They had groups who would follow the frontline soldiers, round up all the people to be killed, dig a big hole, then shoot them. But that took too long and consumed resources that could be used elsewhere. The extermination camps were much more efficient. People arrived, were sorted, killed and their bodies burned within hours. To use them as cheap slave labor for the war effort and to be used as test subjects for human experiments. Age and gender weren't really factors in this. Murdering Jews was creating a lot of mental health issues among German soldiers. They tried that Google Einsatzgruppen. It was wildly inefficient and mentally taxing on soldiers. Turns out herding them into camps on false pretenses of being temporary with reasonable accommodations and then dehumanizing them until the camp guards no longer saw them as people worked better. Not to mention easier to hide the evidence, slave labor. They were called work camps by the Nazis. Murdering people in the street tends to make people upset. A huge number were killed on the spot by roving groups of SS and police who rounded up Jews and shot them into pits dug for the purpose. This was done all over occupied parts of the USSR. The camps were mainly for the Jewish population in Poland and in occupied Western countries where they didn't think they could get away with mass public shootings like that. Part of the problem was that these mass shootings were leading to a lot of mental breakdowns, alcoholism, and participants sending photos back to their families in Germany. Centralizing the mass murder operations in a handful of camps cut down on those risks, as it involved a lot less personnel and a lot more control and secrecy. It was also more efficient. So they moved to the extermination camp system over time. At first the Nazis used Einsatzgruppen, special squads that would travel from town to town. As Nazis conquered territory, they'd round up all the Jews and shoot them and they'd go in mass graves. Rule: 1 Jew, 1 bullet. Many didn't die and were buried alive. Problem was that this was too public, too known, and too traumatizing to many of the members of the Einsatzgruppen. By moving all the Jews to a central death camp, they could better conceal what they were doing from the general public. And the reason wasn't so much to keep their actions from the public, but rather to keep their actions from the people they were going to kill. Something not often mentioned when talking about the Holocaust is that it was facilitated by Nazis keeping the information as secret as they could. If people think that compliance means they'll live and resistance means they'll die, then they'll tend to comply. If they know that no matter what, they're going to die, then they'll tend to resist strongly. See Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So death camps allowed for better information control. Separate but related were concentration camps, most of which were designed to store people and work them to death, with some also having death camp facilities that were only for death. Because Jews were German citizens with rights. Stay with me here. You can't just round up citizens and murder them. Nazi Germany had legions of lawyers figuring out legal methods of carrying out their plans. Jews were arrested, then deported to camps in Czechoslovakia or Poland, for example, then stripped of their citizenship, then worked to death or outright murdered. Lots of reasons. 1. The Nazis didn't want witnesses. 2. The Nazis were slaughtering more than Jews in Germany. They were slaughtering homosexuals, gypsies, political opponents, the handicapped, the mentally disabled from pretty much every county they had conquered. 3. The Nazis had procedurized the whole thing as a way to justify it legally. They tried that on the Eastern Front and found that some soldiers refused to shoot unarmed civilians. So they got the idea of organized, impersonal mass murder. Forced labor and bullets were too expensive. It also took a psychological toll on the rank and file Wehrmacht troops to have to murder women and children, so they left it to the SS troops. Well, slave labor, which the Nazis utilized heavily in, and what others have stated, but the other thing you have to remember is this was kept under wraps. Yeah, there was probably a lot of intelligence and rumors etc., but the camps were pretty much discovered and filmed towards the end of Germany's defeat. With the USSR, I heard they just moved out the people the Nazis had detained and placed political prisoners of their own in them. Also like to mention it wasn't just Jews man, Slavs, communists, gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses and any other undesirable to whatever that nutjob and his party was advocating against, because people refused to do that. When they just had people shoot the Jews, they had an impractical number of people refusing to do so, or leaving the SS afterwards. It turns out even most violent racists draw the line at gunning down a 5-year-old in the street. The point of the Holocaust was to provide a mental barrier. You're not killing them, you're just sending them into a room, so that people would actually follow through. It was a gradual process. First they were moved to the ghettos. Then they were moved to the concentration camps. They were used for slave labor in the concentration camps. Corporations actually built many of the camps, for the purposes of using the slave labor provided. Prior to the conquering of France, there is no evidence that the Nazis wanted to wipe out the Jewish people. It seems that with the Jewish population being so large in France, that was the time when it changed from using them as slave labor to a process of slow extermination. One thing to know is that the Holocaust is an outlier in comparison to other genocides. Most genocides happen very quickly, usually on the scale of 1 to several months. The Holocaust is an outlier in its length. Finally, it simply would have been too expensive and too demoralizing to shoot so many people on the spot. Believe it or not, that many bullets would have been expensive. And they did use bullets in the beginning of the liquidation campaign. But it really affected the German soldiers who did so. That's why they changed tactics and began to use the gas chambers. More efficient, less traumatizing to the Nazi guards. From my understanding, a majority of Jews killed during WW2 were never taken to concentration camps. Ken Burns, The U.S. and the Holocaust is very good and goes into depth on stuff I never knew about the Holocaust. That is what they started out doing. Look up the Einsatzgruppen, Operation Barbarossa, or Baben Yar, or watch the movie, Come and See. Be warned on that one, it's brutal but important to watch. It was taking too long with these methods apparently.